The Spring Tune. One calm and cloudless evening, towards the end of April, Snufkin found himself far enough to the north to see still unmelted patches of snow on the northern slopes. He had been walking all day through undisturbed landscapes, listening to the cries of the birds also on their way northwards, home from the south. Walking had been easy, because his knapsack was nearly empty and he had no worries on his mind. He felt happy about the wood and the weather, and himself. Tomorrow and yesterday were both at a distance, and just at present the sun was shining brightly red between the birches, and the air was cool and soft. It's the right evening for a tune, Snufkin thought. A new tune, 1 part expectation, 2 parts spring sadness, and for the rest, just the great delight of walking alone and liking it. He had kept this tune under his hat for several days, but hadn't quite dared to take it out yet. It had to grow into a kind of happy conviction. Then, he would simply have to put his lips to the mouth organ, and all the notes would jump instantly into their places. If he released them too soon they might get stuck crossways and make only a half-good tune, or he might lose them altogether and never be in the right mood to get hold of them again. Tunes are serious things, especially if they have to be jolly and sad at the same time. But this evening Snufkin felt rather sure of his tune. It was there, waiting, nearly full-grown, and it was going to be the best he ever made. Then, when he arrived in Moominvalley, he'd sit on the bridge rail and play it, and Moomintroll would say at once, "That's a good one. Really a good one." Snufkin stopped in his tracks, feeling just a little bit uneasy. Yes, Moomintroll, always waiting and longing. Moomintroll who sat at home, who waited for him and admired him, and who always told him, "Of course you have to feel free. Naturally you must go away. I do understand that you have to be alone at times." And all the times his eyes were black with disappointment and no one could help it. Oh my, Snufkin said to himself and continued on his way. Oh my. He's got such a lot of feelings, this Moomintroll. I won't think of him now. He's a splendid woman, but I don't have to think of him now. Tonight I'm alone with my tune, and tonight isn't tomorrow. In a little while Snufkin had managed to forget all about Moomintroll. He was sniffing around for a good place to camp in, and when he heard a brook a bit further on in the wood he went towards the sound. The last red ray of sunlight had vanished between the birches. Now came the spring twilight, slow and blue. All the wood was changed, and the white pillars of the birches went wandering further and further off in the blue dusk. The brook was a good one. It went rushing clear and brown over wads of last year's leaves, through small tunnels of leftover ice, swerving through the green moss and throwing itself headlong down in a small waterfall onto a white sand bottom. In places it droned sharp as a mosquito, then it tried to sound great and menacing, stopped, gurgled with a mouthful of melted snow, and laughed at it all. Snufkin stood listening in the damp moss. I must have the brook in my tune also, he thought. In the refrain, I think. A small stone suddenly came loose near the waterfall and raised the pitch of the brook a whole octave. Not bad, Snufkin said admiringly. That's the way to do it. A sudden change, just in passing. I'll have to find that brook a tune of its own. He took out his old saucepan and filled it from the waterfall. Then he went in under the first to look for firewood. The ground was still wet from the spring thaw and the rains, and Snufkin had to crawl far under a brambly windfall to find any dry sticks. When he reached out someone gave a sudden shout and flashed past him and off among the firs, still crying and squeaking all the way. Oh yes, Snufkin said. Creeps and woodies everywhere. Funny how nervous they always seem to be. The smaller the jumpier. He found a dried stump and some sticks and built himself a good campfire by the brook. Snufkin was used to cooking his own dinner. He never cooked a dinner for other people if he could avoid it, nor did he care much for other people's dinners. So many people insisted on talking when they had a meal. Also they had a great liking for chairs and tables, and some of them used napkins. He even had heard of a Hemulan who changed his clothes every time he was about to eat, but that was probably slander. A little distractedly Snufkin ate his meager soup while he rested his eyes on the green moss by the birches. The tune was quite near at hand, easy to catch by the tail. But there was time enough to wait, it was hedged in and couldn't get away. No, better to wash the dishes first, then light a pipe, and afterwards, when the campfire was burning down and the night creatures started calling for each other, then he'd have it. Snufkin was washing his saucepan in the brook when he caught sight of the creep. It was sitting on the far side below a tree root, looking at him. Its eyes were scared but very interested, following Snufkin's every movement. 2 shy eyes under a mop of hair. Just the look people have who are never noticed. Snufkin pretended that he hadn't seen the creep. He raked up his fire and cut himself some fir twigs to sit on. He took out his pipe and lit it. He puffed a few clouds of smoke towards the night sky and waited for the spring tune. It didn't come. Instead he felt the creep's eyes upon him. They watched everything he did, admiringly, and he began to feel uneasy once more. He clapped his paws together and shouted, "Shoo! Be off!" At this the creep slunk out from under the tree root. It was still on the other side of the brook and said, very shyly, "I hope I haven't scared you. I know who you are. You're Snufkin." And then the creep stepped straight into the water and started to wade across. The brook was rather too broad for it, and the water was ice cold. A couple of times the creep lost its foothold and tumbled over, but Snufkin was feeling so uneasy that he simply didn't think of giving it a hand. Finally a rather thin and miserable creep crawled ashore and said with chattering teeth, "Hello, I'm so happy to meet you." "Hello," Snufkin answered equally coldly. "May I warm myself by your fire?" the creep continued, its wet little face shining with happiness. "Just think of it, then I'll be the creep who has sat by Snufkin's campfire. I'll never forget that." The creep edged closer, laid one paw on Snufkin's knapsack and solemnly whispered, "Is this where you keep the mouth organ? Do you have it here?" "Yes," Snufkin said, rather crossly. His tune was lost, loneliness was gone, all was different. He clenched his teeth around the pipe stem and stared in among the birches without really seeing them. "Now, don't mind me," the creep said innocently. "In case you'd like to play, I mean. You'd never guess how I long for a little music. I've never heard any. But I've heard about you. The hedgehog, and Toffle, and my mother, they've all told me. Toffle has even seen you, once." Yes, you can't imagine, nothing much ever happens here. But we dream lots and lots. Well, what's your name? Snufkin asked. The evening was spoiled anyway, so he thought it easier to talk. I'm so small that I haven't got a name, the creep said eagerly. As a matter of fact, nobody's even asked me about it before. And then I meet you, whom I've heard so much about and always longed to see, and the first thing you ask me is what my name is. Do you think, perhaps you might? I mean, would it be a lot of trouble for you to think up a name for me, a name that would be only mine and no one else could have it? Now, tonight. Snufkin mumbled something and pulled his hat over his eyes. Someone flew across the brook on long pointed wings and gave a long, sad cry among the trees, yo-yo, yo-oh-oh, ti-woo. You can't ever be really free if you admire somebody too much, Snufkin suddenly said. I know. I know you know everything, the little creep prattled on, edging closer still. I know you've seen everything. You're right in everything you say, and I'll always try to become as free as you are. So now you're on your way to Moominvalley to have a rest and meet your friends. The hedgehog told me that Moomin started waiting for you as soon as he wakes from winter sleep. Isn't it a nice thing to know that someone's longing for you and waiting to see you again? I'm coming when it suits me, Snufkin cried violently. Perhaps I shan't come at all. Perhaps I will go somewhere else. Oh. Then he'll be sad, said the creep. Its fur was beginning to dry and becoming light brown and soft. It picked at the knapsack once again and asked cautiously. Would you perhaps? You who have traveled so much. No, Snufkin said. And he thought angrily, why can't they ever let my wanderings alone? Can't they understand that I'll talk it all to pieces if I have to tell about it? Then it's gone, and when I try to remember what it really was like, I remember only my own story. There was a long silence, and the night bird cried again. The creep arose and said in a small voice. Well, I must be off, I think. Cheerio. Cheerio, Snufkin said, fidgeting a little. Listen. That name you asked for. What about Tidiwoo, for instance? Tidiwoo, don't you see, a light beginning, sort of, and a little sadness to round it off. The little creep stared at him with yellow eyes in the firelight. It thought its name over, tasted it, listened to it, crawled inside it, and finally turned its snout to the sky and softly howled its new name, so sadly and ecstatically that Snufkin felt a shiver along his back. Then a brown tail disappeared in the brambles, and all was silent. Golly, Snufkin said and kicked at an ember. He rapped out his pipe. Then he rose and shouted, hello. Come back. But the wood was silent. Oh, well, Snufkin thought. You can't always be friendly. It's impossible, there isn't the time. And at least this creep has got a name. He sat down again and listened to the brook and the silence, and waited for his tune to come back. But it didn't come. He knew at once that it had moved too far away to be caught. Perhaps he'd never catch it. The only thing he seemed to hear was the eager and shy voice of the creep, talking and talking and talking. Why don't they keep at home with their mothers, Snufkin said crossly and threw himself on his back onto the fir twigs. After a while he sat up and shouted once more. He listened for a long time, then he pulled his hat over his snout and went to sleep. The next morning Snufkin continued his march. He was tired and cross and trudged northwards without looking right or left. And not even the faintest beginning of a tune moved under his hat. He simply could not think of anything but the creep. He remembered every single word it had said and every word he had said himself, and he chewed them over and over until he felt sick and had to sit down and rest. What's come over me, Snufkin thought, angry and bewildered. I've never felt like this before. I must be ill. He rose and continued his way, and it started all over again, everything the creep had told him and all he had said in reply. Finally he had to stop. In the afternoon he turned about and started back. After a while he felt better. He went faster and faster, he bubbled as he ran. Little tunes flitted about his ears but he hadn't the time to catch them. Towards evening he was back in the birchwood and started to call. Tidiwoo, he cried. Tidiwoo. And the night birds awoke and answered him, Tiwoo, Tiwoo, but he heard nothing from the creep. Snufkin walked back and forth, looking and calling and listening, until dusk had fallen. The new moon rose in a clearing, and Snufkin stood looking at it and feeling quite at a loss. I ought to make a wish, he thought. It's a new moon. He was about to wish for the usual thing, a new tune, or, as he sometimes did, a new road. But now he hastily corrected himself and said aloud, to find Tidiwoo. Then he turned around 3 times and crossed the clearing, went into the wood and up a hill. Something rustled in the bushes, something light brown and furry. Tidiwoo. Snufkin called softly. I've come back for a chat. Oh. Hello, Tidiwoo replied and stuck out his head from the bushes. That's splendid, because I've got something to show you. Look. A nameplate. With my own name on it, to hang on my door when I get a house of my own. The creep showed him a piece of bark with an owner's mark on it, and continued importantly. Neat, isn't it? Everybody thinks so. Very. Snufkin said. So you'll have a house of your own. Indeed, the creep said excitedly, I've moved away from home and begun living. It's so exciting. You see, before I had a name I just used to hop around, and perhaps feel this or that about this or that, and everything was simply happening around me, sometimes nice things and sometimes not nice, but nothing was real, don't you see? Snufkin started to reply, but the creep continued, now I'm a person, and everything that happens means something. Because it doesn't only happen, it happens. To me, Tidiwoo. And Tidiwoo may think this or think that about it, as the case may be if you see what I mean. Certainly, I see, said Snufkin. That's good for you. Tidiwoo nodded and started to rummage in the bushes. Know what, Snufkin said, I'm on my way to Moomin still. As a matter of fact I really want to see him. Oh, said Tidiwoo, Moomin. Yes. Perhaps you'd like to hear some tunes before I have to start, Snufkin continued, or maybe a few stories. The creep stuck out its head and said. Stories. Oh, yes. Later tonight, perhaps. Just at the moment I'm in quite a hurry, I'm sure you don't mind. The light brown tail vanished in the heather, and after a while Tidiwoo's ears came to view a bit further away, and he called out, "Cheerio, and give my greetings to Moomintroll. I'll have to live as fast as I can, because I've lost a lot of time already." Then he was gone. Snufkin scratched his head. So, he said to himself. Yes. I see. He stretched out on his back and looked up into the spring sky. It was a clear dark blue straight above him and sea green over the treetops. Somewhere under his hat the tune began to move, 1 part expectation, and 2 parts spring sadness, and for the rest just a colossal delight at being alone. The last dragon in the world. One Thursday, one of the last of the dog days, Moomintroll caught a small dragon in the brown pond to the right of Moominpapa's hammock tree. Of course he hadn't dreamed of catching a dragon. He had hunted for a few of those small wobbly things that were rowing about in the bottom mud, because he wanted to know how they moved their legs when swimming, and whether they always swam backwards. But when he lifted his glass jar against the light there was something altogether different in it. "By my everlasting tail," Moomintroll whispered, overawed. He held the jar between both paws and could only stare. The dragon was no bigger than a matchbox, and it swam around with graceful strokes of its transparent wings that were as beautiful as the fins of a goldfish. But no goldfish was as splendidly golden as this miniature dragon. It was sparkling like gold, it was knobbly with gold in the sunlight, the small head was emerald green and its eyes were lemon yellow. The 6 golden legs had each a green little paw, and the tail turned green towards the tip. It was a truly wonderful dragon. Moomintroll screwed the lid on the jar, there were breathing holes, and carefully put it down in the moss. Then he stretched himself out beside the jar and took a closer look. The dragon swam close to the glass wall and opened its small jaws. They were packed with tiny white teeth. "It's angry," Moomintroll thought. "It's angry even if it's so very small. What can I do to make it like me? And what does it eat? What do dragons feed on?" A little worried and anxious he lifted the jar in his arms and started homewards, cautiously, so as not to make the dragon hurt itself against the glass walls. It was so very small and delicate. "I'll keep you and pet you and love you," Moomintroll whispered. "You can sleep on my pillow. When you grow up and start liking me I'll take you for swims in the sea." Asterisk. Moominpapa was working on his tobacco patch. One could always show him the dragon and ask him about it. Or still, perhaps better not. Not yet. One could keep it a secret for a few days, until it had become used to people. And until one had had the greatest fun of all, showing it to Snufkin. Moomintroll pressed the jar hard against him and went strolling towards the back door as indifferently as possible. The others were somewhere on the front side by the veranda. At the moment when Moomintroll slunk up the back steps Little My jumped into view from behind the water barrel and called. "What be you got?" "Nothing," said Moomintroll. "HR," said Mai, craning her neck. "What's in it? Why are you hiding it?" Moomintroll rushed upstairs and into his room. He put the jar on the table. The water was sloshing about, and the dragon had wound his wings around him and curled up into a ball. Now it slowly straightened out and showed its teeth. "It won't happen again," Moomintroll promised. "I'm so sorry, dearest." He screwed off the lid, so as to give the dragon a better view, and then he went to the door and put the latch on. You never knew with Mai. When he returned to the dragon it had crawled out of the water and was sitting on the edge of the jar. Moomintroll cautiously stuck out a paw to fondle it. At this the dragon opened its jaws again and blew out a small cloud of smoke. A red tongue darted out like a flame and vanished again. "Ow," said Moomintroll, because he had burned himself. Not much, but distinctly. He admired the dragon more than ever. "You're angry, aren't you?" he asked in a low voice. "You're terribly wild and cruel and wicked, are you? What? Oh you sweet little goody-goody-goo." The dragon snorted. Moomintroll crawled under his bed and pulled out his night box. In it were a couple of small pancakes, now a little dried, half a piece of bread and butter and an apple. He cut small pieces from them all and laid the morsels on the table in a circle around the dragon. It sniffed at them, gave him a contemptuous look and suddenly ran surprisingly nimbly to the window, where it attacked a large August fly. The fly stopped humming and started to screech. The dragon already had its small green forepaws around its neck and blew a little smoke in its eyes. And then the small white teeth went snippety-snap, the jaws came open and the August fly disappeared. The dragon swallowed twice, licked its snout, scratched its ear and gave Moomintroll a scoffing, one-eyed glance. "How clever you are," cried Moomintroll. "My little teeny-weeny poo." Just then Moominmama beat the lunch gong downstairs. "Now wait for me and be good," Moomintroll said. "I'll be back soon." He stood for a moment looking longingly at the dragon, that didn't appear to be cuddly in the least. Then he whispered, "Little dearie," and ran downstairs and out on the veranda. Even before her spoon had touched her porridge Mai started off. Certain people seem to be hiding secrets in mysterious glass jars. "Shut up," said Moomintroll. "One is led to believe," Mai continued, "that certain people are keeping leeches or woodlice or why not very large centipedes that multiply 100 times a minute." "Mother," Moomintroll said. "You know, I've always wished for some small pet that was attached to me, and if I would ever have one, then it should be, or would." "How much wood would a woodlouse chuck?" said Mai and blew bubbles in her milk glass. "What?" asked Moominpapa and looked up from his newspaper. "Moomintroll has found a new animal," Moominmama explained. "Does it bite?" "It's so small it can't bite very hard," her son mumbled. "And when will it grow up?" asked the Mimble. "When can one have a look at it?" "Does it talk?" Moomintroll was silent. Now all was spoiled again. One ought to have the right to have a secret and to spring it as a surprise. But if you live inside a family you have neither. They know about everything from the start, and nothing's any fun after that. "I'm going down to the river after lunch," Moomintroll said, slowly and contemptuously. Contemptuously as a dragon. "Mother, please tell them that they're not to go into my room. I can't answer for the consequences." "Good," said Moominmama and gave Mai a look, "not a living soul may open his door." Moomintroll finished his porridge in dignified silence. Then he went out, through the garden down to the bridge. Asterisk. Snufkin was sitting before his tent, painting a cork float. Moomin Troll looked at him, and straight away he felt happy over his dragon again. "Whew," he said. "Families are a cross sometimes." Snufkin grunted in agreement without taking his pipe from his mouth. They sat silent for a while, in male and friendly solidarity. "By the way," Moomin Troll suddenly said. "Have you ever come across a dragon on your wanderings?" "You don't mean salamanders, lizards, or crocodiles, apparently," Snufkin replied after a long silence. "You mean a dragon?" "No. Never. They're extinct. But there might be one left," Moomin Troll said slowly, "and someone might even catch it in a glass jar someday." Snufkin gave him a sharp look and saw that Moomin Troll was about to burst from delight and suspense. So he replied quite curtly. "I don't believe it. Possibly it would be no bigger than a matchbox even if it could spit fire all right," Moomin Troll continued with a yawn. "Well, that's pure fantasy, of course," said Snufkin, who knew how surprises are prepared. His friend stared past him and said, "A dragon of pure gold with tiny green paws, who'd be devoted to one and follow one everywhere." And then Moomin Troll jumped to his feet and cried, "I found it. I found a real dragon of my own." Asterisk. While they walked up to the house, Snufkin went through the whole scale of disbelief, astonishment, and wonder. He was perfect. They went upstairs, opened the door with great caution and went in. The jar of water stood on the table as before, but the dragon had disappeared from it. Moomin Troll looked under the bed, behind the chest of drawers and all over the floor, calling all the while. "Little friend, my pretty, my teeny weeny, where are you?" "Moomin," Snufkin said, "it's sitting on the window curtain." So it was, high on the rod near the ceiling. "How on earth?" cried Moomin Troll in great alarm. "He mustn't fall down. Keep quite still. Wait a bit, don't talk." He pulled the bedclothes from his bed and spread them on the floor below the window. Then he took the Hemulin's old butterfly net and reached up towards the dragon. "Jump," he whispered. "Teeny weeny, don't be afraid, it can't hurt you." "You'll frighten it away," said Snufkin. The dragon yawned and hissed. It gave the butterfly net a good bite and started to purr like a small engine. And suddenly it flapped out under the ceiling and began flying around in circles. He's flying, he's flying." Moomin Troll shouted. "My dragon's flying." "Of course," said Snufkin. "Don't jump about so. Keep still." The dragon was hanging quite still in the air. Its wings were a blur, like a moth's. And then suddenly it dived down, bit Moomin Troll in the ear, so he gave a cry and then it flew straight to Snufkin and settled on his shoulder. It edged closer against his ear, closed its eyes and started to purr. "What a funny creature," Snufkin said in astonishment. "It's all hot and glowing. What does it do?" "It's liking you," said Moomin Troll. Asterisk. In the afternoon the Snork maiden came home from visiting Little Mai's grandma and of course was told at once that Moomin Troll had found a dragon. It was sitting on the veranda table beside Snufkin's cup of coffee, licking its paws. It had bitten everybody except Snufkin, and every time it became cross at anything it burned a hole somewhere. "What a sweetie pie," said the Snork maiden. "What's its name?" "Nothing special," Moomin Troll mumbled. "It's just a dragon." He let his paw warily crawl across the table until it touched one of the little gilded legs. At once the dragon whirled around, hissed at him and blew a small cloud of smoke. "How sweet," the Snork maiden cried. The dragon ran over to Snufkin's pipe that was lying at the table, and sniffed at the bowl. Where it had sat was a round brown-edged hole in the tablecloth. "I wonder if it can burn through oilcloth too," Moomin Mama said. "Naturally," said Little Mai. "Just wait until it's grown a bit. It'll burn down the house for us." She grabbed a piece of cake, and the dragon rushed at her like a small golden fury and bit her in the paw. "You D spider," cried Mai, and slapped at the dragon with her napkin. "If you say things like that you'll never go to heaven," the Mimble started instantly, but Moomin Troll cut her short with a cry. It wasn't the dragon's fault. He thought you wanted the fly that was sitting on the cake. "You and your dragon," cried Mai, whose paw was really hurting badly. "It isn't yours even, it's Snufkin's, because it likes only him." There was a silence. "Did I hear the small fry squeak?" said Snufkin and rose from the table. "A few hours more and it'll know where it belongs." "Well, be off. Fly to master." But the dragon had settled on Snufkin's shoulder again and clung to it with all 6 clawed paws, purring all the while like a sewing machine. Snufkin picked it up between thumb and forefinger and put it under the tea cozy. Then he opened the glass door and went out into the garden. "Oh, he'll suffocate," Moomin Troll said and lifted the tea cozy half an inch off the table. The dragon came out like lightning, flew straight to the window and sat there staring after Snufkin, with its paws against the pane. After a little while it began to whine, and its golden color turned to grey from neck to tail. Dragons, Moomin Papa broke the silence, disappeared from public consciousness about 70 years ago. I've looked them up in the encyclopedia. The last to keep alive was the emotional species with strong combustion. They are most stubborn and never change their mind about anything. "Thanks for the tea," Moomin Troll said and rose from the table. "I'm going upstairs." "Darling, shall we leave your dragon here on the veranda?" Moomin Mama asked. "Or are you taking it along with you?" Moomin Troll didn't reply. He went to the door and opened it. There was a flash as the dragon swished past him, and the Snork maiden cried. "Oh. You won't catch it again. Why did you? I hadn't even looked at it properly yet." "Go and look for Snufkin," Moomin Troll said between clenched teeth. "It will be sitting on his shoulder." "My darling," Moomin Mama said sadly. "My little troll." Asterisk. Snufkin had barely got his fishing line baited when the dragon came buzzing and settled on his knee. It nearly tied itself into knots from delight at having found him. "Well, this is a pretty kettle," Snufkin said and whisked the creature away. "Shoo. Be off with you. Go home." But of course he knew it was no use. The dragon would never leave him. And for all he knew it could live 100 years. Snufkin looked a little sadly at the small shining creature that was doing all it could to attract his attention. Then he fled into his park and started on his leaf hut again. He worked and worked, but nothing went quite right. His thoughts were elsewhere, and suddenly the roof came down and the hut laid itself flat on the ground. No, said the Hemulan. I don't want to. I've only just learned to say no. I'm pensioned. I do what I like. Nothing else. He said these things several times over, more and more menacingly. Then he rose to his feet, walked through the park, unlocked the gate and began to pull all the blessed junk and scrap inside. Asterisk. The kitties were sitting perched on the high wall around the Hemulan's park. They resembled grey sparrows but were quite silent. At times someone whispered, "What's he doing now?" "Hush," said another. "He doesn't like to talk." The Hemulan had hung some lanterns and paper roses in the trees and turned all broken and ragged parts out of sight. Now he was assembling something that had once been a merry-go-round. The parts did not fit together very well, and half of them seemed to be missing. "It's no use," he shouted crossly. "Can't you see? It's just a lot of scrap and nothing else." "No. I won't have any help from you." A murmur of encouragement and sympathy was carried down from the wall, but not a word was heard. The Hemulan started to make the merry-go-round into a kind of house instead. He put the horses in the grass and the swans in the brook, turned the rest upside down and worked with his hair on end. Doll's house. He thought bitterly. What it all comes to in the end is a lot of tinsel and gewgaws on a dust heap, and a noise and racket like it's been all my life. Then he looked up and shouted. "What are you staring at? Run along to the Hemulans and tell them I don't want any dinner tomorrow. Instead they might send me nails and a hammer and candles and ropes and some 2-inch battens, and they'd better be quick about it." The kitties laughed and ran off. "Didn't we tell him?" the Hemulans cried and slapped each other's backs. "He has to have something to do. The poor little thing's longing for his pleasure ground." And they sent him twice what he had asked for, and, furthermore, food for a week, and 10 yards of red velvet, gold, and silver paper in rolls and a barrel organ just in case. "No," said the Hemulan. "No music box. Nothing that makes a noise." "Of course not," the kitties said and kept the barrel organ outside. The Hemulan worked, built, and constructed. And while building he began to like the job, rather against his will. High in the trees thousands of mirror glass splinters glittered, swaying with the branches in the winds. In the treetops the Hemulan made little benches and soft nests where people could sit and have a drink of juice without being observed, or just sleep. And from the strong branches hung the swings. The roller coaster railway was difficult. It had to be only a third of its former size, because so many parts were missing. But the Hemulan comforted himself with the thought that no one could be frightened enough to scream in it now. And from the last stretch one was dumped in the brook, which is great fun to most people. But still the railway was a bit too much for the Hemulan to struggle with single-handed. When he had got one side right the other side fell down, and at last he shouted, very crossly. "Lend me a hand, someone. I can't do 10 things at once all alone." The kitties jumped down from the wall and came running. After this they built it all jointly, and the Hemulans sent them such lots of food that the kitties were able to stay all day in the park. In the evening they went home, but by sunrise they stood waiting at the gate. One morning they had brought along the alligator on a string. "Are you sure he'll keep quiet?" the Hemulan asked suspiciously. "Quite sure," the Whampa replied. "He won't say a word. He's so quiet and friendly now that he's got rid of his other heads." One day the Fillyjunk's son found the boa constrictor in the porcelain stove. As it behaved nicely it was immediately brought along to Grandma's park. Everybody collected strange things for the Hemulan's pleasure ground, or simply sent him cakes, kettles, window curtains, toffee or whatever. It became a fad to send along presents with the kitties in the mornings, and the Hemulan accepted everything that didn't make a noise. But he let no one inside the wall, except the kitties. The park grew more and more fantastic. In the middle of it the Hemulan lived in the merry-go-round house. It was gaudy and lopsided, resembling most of all a large toffee paper bag that somebody had crumpled up and thrown away. Inside it grew the rose bush with all the red hips. Asterisk. And one beautiful, mild evening all was finished. It was definitely finished, and for one moment the sadness of completion overtook the Hemulan. They had lighted the lanterns and stood looking at their work. Mirror glass, silver, and gold gleamed in the great dark trees. Everything was ready and waiting: the ponds, the boats, the tunnels, the switchback, the juice stand, the swings, the dartboards, the trees for climbing, the apple boxes. "Here you are," the Hemulan said. "Just remember that this is not a pleasure ground, it's the park of silence." The kitties silently threw themselves into the enchantment they had helped to build. But the Whampa turned and asked. "And you won't mind that you've no tickets to punch?" "No," said the Hemulan. "I'd punch the air in any case." He went into the merry-go-round and lighted the moon from the miracle house. Then he stretched himself out in the Fillyjunk's hammock and lay looking at the stars through a hole in the ceiling. Outside all was silent. He could hear nothing except the nearest brook and the night wind. Suddenly the Hemulan felt anxious. He sat up, listening hard. Not a sound. Perhaps they don't have any fun at all, he thought worriedly. Perhaps they're not able to have any fun without shouting their heads off. Perhaps they've gone home? He took a leap up on Gaffsy's old chest of drawers and thrust his head out of a hole in the wall. No, they hadn't gone home. All the park was rustling and seething with a secret and happy life. He could hear a splash, a giggle, faint thuds and thumps, padding feet everywhere. They were enjoying themselves. Tomorrow, thought the Hemulan, tomorrow I'll tell them they may laugh and possibly even hum a little if they feel like it. But not more than that. Absolutely not. He climbed down and went back to his hammock. Very soon he was asleep and not worrying over anything. Asterisk. Outside the wall, by the locked gate, the Hemulan's uncle was standing. He looked through the bars but saw very little. Doesn't sound as if they had much fun, he thought. But then, everyone has to make what he can out of life. And my poor relative always was a bit queer. He took the barrel organ home with him because he had always loved music. The invisible child. One dark and rainy evening the Moomin family sat around the veranda table picking over the day's mushroom harvest. The big table was covered with newspapers, and in the center of it stood the lighted kerosene lamp. But the corners of the veranda were dark. "Ma has been picking pepper spunk again," Moomin Papa said. Last year she collected flybane. Let's hope she takes to chanterelles next autumn, said Moomin Mama. Or at least to something not directly poisonous. Hope for the best and prepare for the worst, Little Mai observed with a chuckle. They continued their work in peaceful silence. Suddenly there were a few light taps on the glass pane in the door, and without waiting for an answer Tuteki si Amen and shook the rain off her oilskin jacket. Then, she held the door open and called out in the dark, well, come along. Whom are you bringing? Moomintroll asked. It's Nini, Tuteki said. Yes, her name's Nini. She still held the door open, waiting. No one came. Oh, well, Tuteki said and shrugged her shoulders. If she's too shy she'd better stay there for a while. She'll be drenched through, said Moomin Mama. Perhaps that won't matter much when one's invisible, Tuteki said and sat down by the table. The family stopped working and waited for an explanation. You all know, don't you, that if people are frightened very often, they sometimes become invisible, Tuteki said and swallowed a small egg mushroom that looked like a little snowball. Well, this Nini was frightened the wrong way by a lady who had taken care of her without really liking her. I've met this lady, and she was horrid. Not the angry sort, you know, which would have been understandable. No, she was the icily ironical kind. What's ironical? Moomintroll asked. Well, imagine that you slip on a rotten mushroom and sit down on the basket of newly picked ones, Tuteki said. The natural thing for your mother would be to be angry. But no, she isn't. Instead she says, very coldly, I understand that's your idea of a graceful dance, but I'd thank you not to do it in people's food. Something like that. How unpleasant, Moomintroll said. Yes, isn't it, replied Tuteki. This was the way this lady used to talk. She was ironic all day long every day, and finally the kid started to turn pale and fade around the edges, and less was seen of her. Last Friday one couldn't catch sight of her at all. The lady gave her away to me and said she really couldn't take care of relatives she couldn't even see. And what did you do to the lady? Mai asked with bulging eyes. Did you bash her head? That's of no use with the ironic sort, Tuteki said. I took Nini home with me, of course. And now I've brought her here for you to make her visible again. There was a slight pause. Only the rain was heard, rustling along over the veranda roof. Everybody stared at Tuteki and thought for a while. Does she talk? Moomin Papa asked. No. But the lady has hung a small silver bell around her neck so that one can hear where she is. Tuteki arose and opened the door again. Nini, she called out in the dark. The cool smell of autumn crept in from the garden, and a square of light threw itself on the wet grass. After a while there was a slight tinkle outside, rather hesitantly. The sound came up the steps and stopped. A bit above the floor a small silver bell was seen hanging in the air on a black ribbon. Nini seemed to have a very thin neck. All right, Tuteki said. Now, here's your new family. They're a bit silly at times, but rather decent, largely speaking. Give the kid a chair, Moomin Papa said. Does she know how to pick mushrooms? I really know nothing at all about Nini, Tuteki said. I've only brought her here and told you what I know. Now I have a few other things to attend to. Please look in someday, won't you, and let me know how you get along. Cheerio. When Tuteki had gone the family sat quite silent, looking at the empty chair and the silver bell. After a while one of the chanterelles slowly rose from the heap on the table. Invisible paws picked it clean from needles and earth. Then it was cut to pieces, and the pieces drifted away and laid themselves in the basin. Another mushroom sailed up from the table. Thrilling. Mai said with awe. Try to give her something to eat. I'd like to know if you can see the food when she swallows it. How on earth does one make her visible again? Moomin Papa said worriedly. Should we take her to a doctor? I don't think so, said Moomin Mama. I believe she wants to be invisible for a while. Tuteki said she's shy. Better leave the kid alone until something turns up. And so it was decided. The eastern attic room happened to be unoccupied, so Moomin Mama made Nini a bed there. The silver bell tinkled along after her upstairs and reminded Moomin Mama of the cat that once had lived with them. At the bedside she laid out the apple, the glass of juice and the 3 striped pieces of candy everybody in the house was given at bedtime. Then she lighted a candle and said, Now have a good sleep, Nini. Sleep as late as you can. There'll be tea for you in the morning anytime you want. And if you happen to get a funny feeling or if you want anything, just come downstairs and tinkle. Moomin Mama saw the quilt raise itself to form a very small mound. A dent appeared in the pillow. She went downstairs again to her own room and started looking through her granny's old notes about infallible household remedies. Evil eye. Melancholy. Colds. No. There didn't seem to be anything suitable. Yes, there was. Towards the end of the notebook she found a few lines written down at the time when Granny's hand was already rather shaky. If people start getting misty and difficult to see. Good. Moomin Mama read the recipe, which was rather complicated, and started at once to mix the medicine for little Nini. Asterisk. The bell came tinkling downstairs, one step at a time, with a small pause between each step. Moomintroll had waited for it all morning. But the silver bell wasn't the exciting thing. That was the pause. Nini's paws were coming down the steps. They were very small, with anxiously bunched toes. Nothing else of Nini was visible. It was very odd. Moomintroll drew back behind the porcelain stove and stared bewitchedly at the paws that passed him on their way to the veranda. Now she served herself some tea. The cup was raised in the air and sank back again. She ate some bread and butter and marmalade. Then the cup and saucer drifted away to the kitchen, were washed and put away in the closet. You see, Nini was a very orderly little child. Moomintroll rushed out in the garden and shouted, Mama. She's got paws. You can see her paws. I thought as much, Moomin Mama was thinking where she sat high in the apple tree. Granny knew a thing or two. Now when the medicine starts to work we'll be on the right way. Splendid, said Moomin Papa. And better still when she shows her snout one day. It makes me feel sad to talk with people who are invisible. And who never answer me. Hush, dear, Moomin Mama said warningly. Nini's paws were standing in the grass among the fallen apples. Hello Ninny, shouted Mai. You've slept like a hog. When are you going to show your snout? You must look a fright if you've wanted to be invisible. Shut up, Moomintroll whispered, she'll be hurt. He went running up to Ninny and said. Never mind Mai. She's hard-boiled. You're really safe here among us. Don't even think about that horrid lady. She can't come here and take you away. In a moment Ninny's paws had faded away and become nearly indistinguishable from the grass. Darling, you're an ass, said Moomin Mama. You can't go about reminding the kid about those things. Now pick apples and don't talk rubbish. They all picked apples. After a while Ninny's paws became clearer again and climbed one of the trees. It was a beautiful autumn morning. The shadows made one's snout a little chilly, but the sunshine felt nearly like summer. Everything was wet from the night's rain, and all colors were strong and clear. When all the apples were picked or shaken down, Moomin Papa carried the biggest apple mincer out in the garden, and they started making apple cheese. Moomintroll turned the handle, Moomin Mama fed the mincer with apples, and Moomin Papa carried the filled jars to the veranda. Little Mai sat in a tree singing the big apple song. Suddenly there was a crash. On the garden path appeared a large heap of apple cheese, all prickly with glass splinters. Beside the heap one could see Ninny's paws, rapidly fading away. Oh, said Moomin Mama. That was the jar we used to give to the bumblebees. Now we needn't carry it down to the field. And Granny always said that if you want the earth to grow something for you, then you have to give it a present in the autumn. Ninny's paws appeared back again, and above them a pair of spindly legs came to view. Above the legs one could see the faint outline of a brown dress hem. I can see her legs, cried Moomintroll. Congrats, said Little Mai, looking down out of her tree. Not bad. But the Grope knows why you must wear snuff brown. Moomin Mama nodded to herself and sent a thought to her granny and the medicine. Ninny padded along after them all day. They became used to the tinkle and no longer thought Ninny very remarkable. By evening they had nearly forgotten about her. But when everybody was in bed, Moomin Mama took out a rose-pink shawl of hers and made it into a little dress. When it was ready she carried it upstairs to the eastern attic room and cautiously laid it out on a chair. Then she made a broad hair ribbon out of the material left over. Moomin Mama was enjoying herself tremendously. It was exactly like sewing dolls' clothes again. And the funny thing was that one didn't know if the doll had yellow or black hair. Asterisk. The following day Ninny had her dress on. She was visible up to her neck, and when she came down to morning tea she bobbed and piped. Thank you all ever so much. The family felt very embarrassed, and no one found anything to say. Also it was hard to know where to look when one talked to Ninny. Of course one tried to look a bit above the bell where Ninny was supposed to have her eyes. But then very easily one found oneself staring at some of the visible things further down instead, and it gave one an impolite feeling. Moomin Papa cleared his throat. We're happy to see, he started, that we see more of Ninny today. The more we see the happier we are. Mai gave a laugh and banged the table with her spoon. Fine that you've started talking, she said. Hope you have anything to say. Do you know any good games? No, Ninny piped. But I've heard about games. Moomintroll was delighted. He decided to teach Ninny all the games he knew. After coffee all three of them went down to the river to play. Only Ninny turned out to be quite impossible. She bobbed and nodded and very seriously replied, quite, and how funny, and of course, but it was clear to all that she played only from politeness and not to have fun. Run, run, can't you? Mai cried. Or can't you even jump? Ninny's thin legs dutifully ran and jumped. Then she stood still again with arms dangling. The empty dress neck over the bell was looking strangely helpless. Do you think anybody likes that? Mai cried. Haven't you any life in you? Do you want a biff on the nose? Rather not, Ninny piped humbly. She can't play, mumbled Moomintroll. She can't get angry, Little Mai said. That's what's wrong with her. Listen, you, Mai continued and went close to Ninny with a menacing look. You'll never have a face of your own until you've learned to fight. Believe me. Yes, of course, Ninny replied, cautiously backing away. Asterisk. There was no further turn for the better. At last they stopped trying to teach Ninny to play. She didn't like funny stories either. She never laughed at the right places. She never laughed at all, in fact. This had a depressing effect on the person who told the story. And she was left alone to herself. Days went by, and Ninny was still without a face. They became accustomed to seeing her pink dress marching along behind Moomin Mama. As soon as Moomin Mama stopped, the silver bell also stopped, and when she continued her way the bell began tinkling again. A bit above the dress a big rose-pink bow was bobbing in thin air. Moomin Mama continued to treat Ninny with Granny's medicine, but nothing further happened. So after some time she stopped the treatment, thinking that many people had managed all right before without a head, and besides perhaps Ninny wasn't very good looking. Now everyone could imagine for himself what she looked like, and this can often brighten up a relationship. One day the family went off through the wood down to the beach. They were going to pull the boat up for winter. Ninny came tinkling behind as usual, but when they came in view of the sea she suddenly stopped. Then she lay down on her stomach in the sand and started to whine. What's come over Ninny? Is she frightened? Asked Moomin Papa. Perhaps she hasn't seen the sea before, Moomin Mama said. She stooped and exchanged a few whispering words with Ninny. Then she straightened up again and said. No, it's the first time. Ninny thinks the sea's too big. Of all the silly kids, Little Mai started, but Moomin Mama gave her a severe look and said, don't be a silly kid yourself. Now let's pull the boat ashore. They went out on the landing stage to the bathing hut where Tutiki lived, and knocked at the door. Hello, Tutiki said, how's the invisible child? There's only her snout left, Moomin Papa replied. At the moment she's a bit startled but it'll pass over. Can you lend us a hand with the boat? Certainly, Tutiki said. While the boat was pulled ashore and turned keel upwards Ninny had padded down to the water's edge and was standing immobile on the wet sand. They left her alone. Moomin Mama sat down on the landing stage and looked down into the water. Dear me, how cold it looks, she said. And then she yawned a bit and added that nothing exciting had happened for weeks. Moomin Papa gave Moomintroll a wink, pulled a horrible face and started to steal up to Moomin Mama from behind. Of course he didn't really think of pushing her in the water as he had done many times when she was young. Perhaps he didn't even want to startle her, but just to amuse the kids a little. But before he reached her a sharp cry was heard, a pink streak of lightning shot over the landing stage and Moominpapa let out a scream and dropped his hat into the water. Ninny had sunk her small invisible teeth in Moominpapa's tail, and they were sharp. "Good work," cried Mai. "I couldn't have done it better myself." Ninny was standing on the landing stage. She had a small, snub-nosed, angry face below a red tangle of hair. She was hissing at Moominpapa like a cat. "Don't you dare push her into the big horrible sea," she cried. I see her," shouted Moomintroll. "She's sweet." "Sweet my eye," said Moominpapa, inspecting his bitten tail. "She's the silliest, nastiest, badly brought upest child I've ever seen, with or without a head." He knelt down on the landing stage and tried to fish for his hat with a stick. And in some mysterious way he managed to tip himself over, and tumbled in on his head. He came up at once, standing safely on the bottom, with his snout above water and his ears filled with mud. "Oh dear!" Ninny was shouting. "Oh, how great! Oh, how funny!" The landing stage shook with her laughter. "I believe she's never laughed before," Tutiki said wonderingly. "You seem to have changed her, she's even worse than little Mai. But the main thing is that one can see her, of course." "It's all thanks to Granny," Moominmama said. "The secret of the Hattie Fatteners. Once upon a time, rather long ago, it so happened that Moominpapa went away from home without the least explanation and without even himself understanding why he had to go. Moominmama said afterwards that he had seemed odd for quite a time, but probably he hadn't been odder than usual. That was just one of those things one thinks up afterwards when one's bewildered and sad and wants the comfort of an explanation. No one was quite certain of the moment Moominpapa had left. Snufkin said that he had intended to row out with the Hemulan to catch some albin, but according to the Hemulan Moominpapa had only sat on the veranda as usual and suddenly remarked that the weather was hot and boring and that the landing stage needed a bit of repair. In any case Moominpapa hadn't repaired it, because it was as lopsided as before. Also the boat was still there. So Moominpapa had set out on foot, and as he could have chosen several directions there was no point in looking for him. "He'll be back in due time," Moominmama said. "That's what he used to tell me from the beginning, and he always came back, so I suppose he'll return this time too." No one felt worried, and that was a good thing. They had decided never to feel worried about each other. In this way everybody was helped to a good conscience and as much freedom as possible. So Moominmama started some new knitting without making any fuss, and somewhere to the west Moominpapa was wandering along with a dim idea firmly in his head. It had to do with a cape he once had seen on one of the family picnics. The cape had pointed straight out to sea, the sky had been yellow and a bit of wind had sprung up towards night. He had never been able to go out there to see what was on the other side. The family wanted to turn home for tea. They always wanted to go home at the wrong time. But Moominpapa had stood on the beach for a while, looking out over the water. And at that very moment a row of small white boats with sprit sails had come into sight under land, putting straight out to sea. "That's Hattie Fatteners," the Hemulan had said, and in those words everything was expressed. A little slightingly, a little cautiously and quite clearly with repudiation. Those were the outsiders, half dangerous, different. And then an overpowering longing and melancholy had gripped Moominpapa, and the only thing he knew for certain was that he didn't want any tea on the veranda. Not that evening, nor any other evening. This had been quite a time ago, but the picture never left him. And so one afternoon he went away. The day was hot, and he walked at random. He didn't dare to think about it, nor to feel anything, he simply went on walking towards the sunset, screwing up his eyes under the hat brim and whistling to himself, but no special tune. There were uphills and downhills. The trees came wandering towards and past him, and their shadows were beginning to lengthen. At the moment when the sun clipped down into the sea Moominpapa came out onto the long gravel shore where no ways ever stopped and no one ever thought of going for a picnic. He hadn't seen it before, it was a grey and dreary beach that told him nothing except that land ended and sea started here. Moominpapa stepped down to the water and looked outward. And naturally what else could indeed have happened? At that very moment a little white boat came slowly gliding before the wind along the shore. "Here they are," Moominpapa said calmly and started to wave. There were only 3 Hattie Fatteners aboard the boat. They were quite as white as the boat and the sail. One was sitting at the helm and 2 with their backs to the mast. All 3 were staring out to sea and looking as if they had been quarreling. But Moominpapa had heard that Hattie Fatteners never quarrel, they are very silent and interested only in traveling onwards, as far as possible. All the way to the horizon, or to the world's end, which is probably the same thing. Or so people said. It was also said that a Hattie Fattener cared for nothing but himself, and further that they all became electric in a thunderstorm. Also that they were dangerous company to all who lived in drawing rooms and verandas and were used to doing certain things at certain times. All this had greatly interested Moominpapa for as long as he could remember, but as it isn't considered quite nice to talk about Hattie Fatteners, except indirectly, he still didn't know whether all those things were true. Now he felt a shiver from head to tail and in great excitement saw the boat draw nearer. The Hattie Fatteners did not signal to him in reply, one couldn't even imagine them making such large and everyday gestures, but it was quite clear that they were coming for him. With a faint rustling their boat plowed into the gravel and lay still. The Hattie Fatteners turned their round, pale eyes to Moominpapa. He tipped his hat and started to explain. While he spoke the Hattie Fattener's paw started to wave about in time to his words, and this made Moominpapa perplexed. He suddenly found himself hopelessly tangled up in a long sentence about horizons, verandas, freedom, and drinking tea when one doesn't want any tea. At last he stopped in embarrassment, and the Hattie Fattener's paw stopped also. Why don't they say anything? Moominpapa thought nervously. Can't they hear me, or do they think I'm silly? He offered his paw and made a friendly, interrogatory noise, but the Hattie Fatteners didn't move. Only their eyes slowly changed color and became yellow as the evening sky. Moominpapa drew his paw back and made a clumsy bow. The Hattie Fatteners at once rose and bowed in reply, very solemnly, all 3 at the same time. A pleasure, Moominpapa said. He made no other effort to explain things, but clambered aboard and thrust off. The sky was burning yellow, exactly as it had been that other time. The boat started on a slow outward tack. Never in his life had Moominpappa felt so at ease and pleased with everything. He found it splendid for a change not to have to say anything or explain anything to himself or to others. He could simply sit looking at the horizon listening to the cluck of the water. When the coast had disappeared, a full moon rose, round and yellow over the sea. Never before had Moominpappa seen such a large and lonely moon. And never before had he grasped that the sea could be as absolute and enormous as he saw it now. All at once he had a feeling that the only real and convincing things in existence were the moon and the sea and the boat, with the three silent Hattie Fatteners. And the horizon, of course the horizon in the distance where splendid adventures and nameless secrets were waiting for him, now that he was free at last. He decided to become silent and mysterious, like a Hattie Fattener. People respected one if one didn't talk. They believed that one knew a great many things and led a very exciting life. Moominpappa looked at the Hattie Fatteners at the helm. He felt like saying something chummy, something to show he understood. But then he let it alone. Anyway, he didn't find any words that would have sounded right. What was it the Mimble had said about Hattie Fatteners? Last spring, at dinner one day. That they led a wicked life. And Moomin Mama had said, that's just talk, but Mai became enormously interested and wanted to know what it meant. As far as Moominpappa could remember, no one had been really able to describe what people did when they led a wicked life. Probably they behaved wildly and freely in a general way. Moomin Mama had said that she didn't even believe that a wicked life was any fun, but Moominpappa hadn't been quite sure. It's got something to do with electricity, the Mimble had said, cocksurely. And they're able to read people's thoughts, and that's not allowed. Then the talk had turned to other things. Moominpappa gave the Hattie Fatteners a quick look. They were waving their paws again. Oh, how horrible, he thought. Can it be that they're sitting there reading my thoughts with their paws? And now they're hurt, of course. He tried desperately to smooth out all his thoughts, clear them out of the way, forget all he had ever heard about Hattie Fatteners, but it wasn't easy. At the moment nothing else interested him. If he could only talk to them. It was such a good way to keep one from thinking. And it was no use to leave the great dangerous thoughts aside and concentrate on the small and friendly sort. Because then the Hattie Fatteners might think that they were mistaken and that he was only an ordinary veranda Moominpappa. Moominpappa strained his eyes looking out over the sea towards a small black cliff that showed in the moonlight. He tried to think quite simple thoughts. There's an island in the sea, the moon's directly above it, the moon's swimming in the water coal black, yellow, dark blue. At last he calmed down again, and the Hattie Fatteners stopped their waving. The island was very steep, although small. Knobbly and dark it rose from the water, not very unlike the head of one of the larger sea serpents. Do we land? Moominpappa asked. The Hattie Fatteners didn't reply. They stepped ashore with the painter and made fast in a crevice. Without giving him a glance they started to climb up the shore. He could see them sniffing against the wind, and then bowing and waving in some deep conspiracy that left him outside. Never mind me, Moominpappa exclaimed in a hurt voice and clambered ashore. But if I ask you if we're going to land, even if I see that we are, you might still give me a civil answer. Just a word or two, so I feel I've company. But he said this only under his breath, and strictly to himself. The cliff was steep and slippery. It was an unfriendly island that told everyone quite clearly to keep out. It had no flowers, no moss, nothing. It just thrust itself out of the water with an angry look. All at once Moominpappa made a very strange and disagreeable discovery. The island was full of red spiders. They were quite small but innumerable, swarming over the black cliff like a live red carpet. Not one of them was sitting still, everyone was rushing about for all his worth. The whole island seemed to be crawling in the moonlight. It made Moominpappa feel quite weak. He lifted his legs, he quickly rescued his tail and shook it thoroughly. He stared about him for a single spot empty of red spiders, but there was none. I don't want to tread on you, Moominpappa mumbled. Dear me, why didn't I remain in the boat? There are too many, it's unnatural to be so many of the same kind, all of them exactly alike. He looked helplessly for the Hattie Fatteners and caught sight of their silhouettes against the moon, high up on the cliff. One of them had found something. Moominpappa couldn't see what it was. No difference to him, anyway. He went back to the boat, shaking his paws like a cat. Some of the spiders had crawled onto him, and he thought it very unpleasant. They soon found the painter also and started to crawl along it in a thin red procession, and from there further along the gunwale. Moominpappa seated himself as far astern as possible. This is something one dreams, he thought. And then one awakens with a jerk to tell Moomin Mama, you can't imagine how horrible, dearest, such a lot of spiders, you never. And she awakens too and replies, oh, poor Papa, that was a dream, there aren't any spiders here. The Hattie Fatteners were slowly returning. Immediately every spider jumped high with fright, turned and ran back ashore along the painter. The Hattie Fatteners came aboard and pushed off. The boat glided out from the black shadow of the island, into the moonlight. Glory be that you're back. Moominpappa cried with great relief. As a matter of fact, I've never liked spiders that are too small to talk with. Did you find anything interesting? The Hattie Fatteners gave him a long moon-yellow look and remained silent. I said did you find anything, Moominpappa repeated, a little red in the snout. If it's a secret of course you can keep it to yourselves. But at least tell me there was something. The Hattie Fatteners were quite still and silent, only looking at him. At this Moominpappa felt his head grow hot and cried. Do you like spiders? Do you like them or not? I want to know at once. In the long ensuing silence one of the Hattie Fatteners took a step forward and spread its paws. Perhaps it had replied something or else it was just a whisper from the wind. I'm sorry, Moominpappa said uncertainly, I see. He felt that the Hattie Fattener had explained to him that they had no special attitude to spiders. Or else it had deplored something that could not be helped. Perhaps the sad fact that a Hattie Fattener and a Moominpappa will never be able to tell each other anything. Perhaps it was disappointed in Moominpappa and thought him rather childish. He sighed and gave them a downcast look. Now, he could see what they had found. It was a small scroll of birch bark, of the sort the sea likes to curl up and throw ashore. Nothing else. You can unroll them like documents, inside they're white and silk smooth, and as soon as they're released they curl shut again. Exactly like a small fist clasped about a secret. Mama used to keep one around the handle of her tea kettle. Probably this scroll contained some important message or other. But Papa wasn't really curious any longer. He was a little cold, and curled up on the floor of the boat for a nap. The Hattie Fatteners never felt any cold, only electricity. And they never slept. Papa awoke by dawn. He felt stiff in the back and still rather cold. From under his hat brim he could see part of the gunnel in a grey triangle of sea falling and rising again. He was feeling a little sick, and not at all like an adventurous woman. One of the Hattie Fatteners was sitting on the nearest thwart, and he observed it surreptitiously. Now its eyes were grey. The paws were very finely cut. They were flexing slowly, like the wings of a sitting moth. Perhaps the Hattie Fattener was talking to its fellows, or just thinking. Its head was round and quite necklace. Most of all he resembles a long white sock, Papa thought. A little frayed at the lower, open end, and as if made of white foam rubber. Now he was feeling a little sicker still. He remembered his behavior of last night. And those spiders. It was the first time he had seen a spider frightened. Dear, Papa mumbled. He was about to sit up, but then he caught sight of the birch bark scroll and stiffened. He pricked his ears under the hat. The scroll lay in the baler on the floor, slowly rolling with the movement of the boat. Papa forgot all about seasickness. His paw cautiously crept out. He gave the Hattie Fatteners a quick look and saw that their eyes as usual were fixed on the horizon. Now he had the scroll, he closed his paw around it, he pulled it towards him. At that moment he felt a slight electric shock, no stronger than from a flashlight battery when you feel it with your tongue. But he hadn't been prepared for it. He lay still for a long time, calming himself. Then started slowly to unroll the secret document. It turned out to be ordinary white birch bark. No treasure map. No code letter. Nothing. Perhaps it was just a kind of visiting card, politely left on every lone island by every Hattie Fattener, to be found by other Hattie Fatteners. Perhaps that little electric shock gave them the same friendly and sociable feeling one gets from a nice letter. Or perhaps they had an invisible writing unknown to ordinary trolls. Papa disappointedly let the birch bark curl itself back into a scroll again, and looked up. The Hattie Fatteners were regarding him calmly. Papa reddened. We're all in the same boat, anyway, he said. And without expecting any reply he spread his paws like he had seen the Hattie Fatteners do, in a helpless and regretful gesture, and sighed. To this the wind replied with a faint howl in the tight stays. The sea was rolling grey waves all the way to the world's end, and Papa thought with some sadness, if this is a wicked life I'd rather eat my hat. Asterisk. There are many kinds of island, but all those that are small enough and far enough are without exception rather sad and lonesome. The winds chase all around them, the yellow moon increases and wanes again, the sea becomes coal black every night, but the islands are always unchanged and only Hattie Fatteners visit them now and then. They are not even real islands. They are skerries, rocks, reefs, forgotten streaks of land that perhaps even sink under water before daybreak and rise over the surface again during the night to take a look around. One can't know. The Hattie Fatteners visited them all. Sometimes a birch bark scroll was there waiting for them. Sometimes there was nothing, the islet was just a smooth seal's back surrounded by breakers, or a ragged rock with high banks of red seaweed. But on the summit of every island the Hattie Fatteners left behind them a small white scroll. They have an idea, Papa thought. Something that's more important to them than all other matters. And I'm going to follow them about until I know what it is. They met no more red spiders, but Papa remained aboard every time they landed. Because those islands made him think of other islands far behind him, the picnic islands, the green and leafy bathing inlets, the tent and the butter container cooling in the shadow by the boat, the juice glasses in the sand, and the bathing trunks adri on a sun-hot boulder. Not that he missed that kind of secure veranda life for a minute. Those were just thoughts that came flapping past and made him a bit sad. Thoughts about small and insignificant things. As a matter of fact Papa had started to think in a wholly new manner. Less and less often he mused about things he had encountered in his kindly and checkered life, and quite as seldom did he dream about what his future would bring him. His thoughts glided along like the boat, without memories or dreams, they were like grey wandering waves that didn't even want to reach the horizon. Papa stopped trying to talk to the Hattie Fatteners. He sat staring seawards, just as they did, his eyes had turned pale like theirs, taking the color of the sky. And when new islands swam into view he didn't even move, only tapped his tail once or twice against the floor. Once, as they glided along on the back of a slow, tired swell, Papa fleetingly thought, I wonder if I'm beginning to resemble a Hattie Fattener. Asterisk. It had been a very hot day, and towards evening a mist rolled in from the sea. It was a heavy, curiously reddish mist. Papa thought it looked menacing and a little alive. The sea serpents were snorting and wallowing far out, he could catch a glimpse of them at times. A round, dark head, startled eyes staring at the Hattie Fatteners, then a splash from a tail fin and a quick flight back into the mist. They're afraid like the spiders were, Papa thought. Everyone's afraid of Hattie Fatteners. A faraway thunderclap went rolling through the silence, and everything was quiet and immobile once more. Papa always had thought thunderstorms very exciting. Now he didn't have any opinion about them. He was quite free, but he just didn't seem to have any likings anymore. At that moment a strange boat steered out of the mist with a large company aboard. Papa jumped to his feet. In a moment he had become the old Papa again, waving his hat about and shouting. The strange boat was coming straight towards them. It was white, the sail was white. And the people aboard it were white. Oh, I see, Papa said. He sat down again. The two boats continued their courses without exchanging any greeting. And then one boat after the other glided out of the dark mist, all going the same way and all manned by Hattie Fatteners. Sometimes by 7, sometimes by 5, or 11, at times. Even by one solitary Hattie Fattener, but always by an odd number. The mist cleared away and rolled into the slightly reddish evening dusk. The sea seemed to be packed with boats. All were on their way towards a new island, a low skerry with no trees and no high cliffs. The thunder went rolling over again. It was hiding somewhere in the enormous black cloud that was now climbing higher and higher over the horizon. One boat after the other put in and lowered sail. The lonely beach was already thronged by hatty fatteners that had arrived earlier and were standing bowing to each other. As far as one could see, white solemn beings were walking about and exchanging bows to right and left. They emitted a faint rustling sound and were constantly waving their paws. The beach grass whispered around them. Moominpappa was standing aside by himself. He tried desperately to find his own hatty fatteners among the crowd. He felt it to be important. They were the only ones he knew, slightly. Very slightly. But still. They had disappeared in the throng. He could see no differences in the many hundreds of hatty fatteners, and all at once Moominpappa was caught by the same terror as on the spider island. He pulled his hat down to his eyebrows and tried to look tough and at ease at the same time. His hat was the only fixed and absolute thing on this strange island where all was white and whispering and vague. Moominpappa didn't quite trust himself any longer, but he believed in his hat. It was black and resolute, and inside it Moominmama had painted the words M.P from your MM to distinguish it from all other high hats in the world. Now the last boat had landed and been pulled ashore, and the hatty fatteners stopped rustling. They turned their reddish eyes towards Moominpappa, all together, and the next instant they began to move in his direction. They want to fight, Moominpappa thought, and was suddenly wide awake and rather elated. In that moment he felt like fighting anyone just to fight and shout and feel sure that everyone else was wrong and deserving a good hiding. Only hatty fatteners never fight, nor do they object to anything or dislike anyone or hold any opinion at all. They came to exchange bows with Moominpappa, all the hundreds of them, and Moominpappa tipped his hat and bowed in reply until he felt a headache coming on. Hundreds of paws waved at him until he also began waving his from sheer exhaustion. When the last hatty fattener had passed him, Moominpappa had forgotten all about wanting a fight. His mind was polite and smooth, and he followed the others, hat in hand, through the whispering grass. The thunderstorm had climbed high in the meantime and was hovering in the sky like a wall about to fall down. High up a wind was blowing, driving small rugged tufts of cloud before it in scared flight. Close to the sea sudden and fitful lightning was flashing, switching off and flaring up again. The hatty fatteners had assembled in the center of the island. They had turned southwards, where the thunderstorm waited, exactly like seabirds before a gale. One after the other they began to light up like little lamp bulbs, flaring in time with the lightning. The grass around them was crackling with electricity. Moominpappa had laid himself on his back and was staring up at the pale green leaves around him. Light, delicate leaves against a dark sky. In his easy chair at home he had a cushion embroidered with fern leaves by Moominmama. Pale green leaves against black felt. It was very beautiful. The thunderstorm was nearing rapidly. Moominpappa felt faint shocks in his paws and sat up. There was rain in the air. All of a sudden the hatty fatteners began fluttering their paws like moth wings. They were all swaying, bowing, and dancing, and a thin, gnat-like song arose from the lonely island. It was the howl of the hatty fatteners, a lonely and yearning sound like wind in a bottleneck. Moominpappa felt an irresistible desire to do as the hatty fatteners did. To sway back and forth, to sway and howl and rustle. He felt a prickle in his ears, and his paws began to wave. He rose to his feet and started to walk towards the hatty fatteners. Their secrets got to do with thunderstorms, he thought. It's thunderstorms they are always looking for and longing for. Darkness fell over the island, and the lightning flashes were running straight down from the sky, like streams of dangerously white and hissing liquid. Far out the wind started to roar, and then the thunder broke loose, the fiercest thunder Moominpappa had ever experienced. Heavy wagons of stone were rolling and rumbling back and forth, to and fro, and the wind caught hold of Moominpappa and threw him back in the grass. He sat holding his hat and feeling the wind blow through him, and all of a sudden he thought, no. What's come over me? I'm no hatty fattener, I'm Moominpappa. What am I doing here? He looked at the hatty fatteners, and with electric simplicity he understood it all. He grasped that only a great thunderstorm could put some life in hatty fatteners. They were heavily charged but hopelessly locked up. They didn't feel, they didn't think, they could only seek. Only in the presence of electricity they were able to live at last, strongly and with great and intense feelings. That was what they longed for. Perhaps they were even able to attract a thunderstorm when they assembled in large crowds. Yes, that must be the solution, Moominpappa thought. Poor hatty fatteners. And I was sitting on my veranda believing they were so remarkable and free, just because they never spoke a word and were always on the move. They hadn't a single word to say and nowhere to go. The skies opened and the rain crashed down, gleaming white in the flashes of lightning. Moominpappa jumped to his feet. His eyes were as blue as ever, and he shouted. I'm going home. I'm leaving at once. He stuck his snout in the air and pulled his hat securely over his ears. Then he ran down to the beach. Jumped aboard one of the white boats, hoisted sail, and put straight out to the stormy sea. He was himself once again, he had his own thoughts about things, and he longed to be home. Just think, never to be glad nor disappointed, Moominpappa mused while the boat was carried along in the gale. Never to like anyone and get cross at him and forgive him. Never to sleep or feel cold, never to make a mistake and have a bellyache and be cured from it, never to have a birthday party, drink beer, and have a bad conscience. How terrible. He felt happy and drenched and not in the least afraid of the thunderstorm. At home they would never have electric light, he decided, they'd keep the old kerosene lamps. Moominpappa longed for his family and his veranda. All of a sudden he thought that at home he could be just as free and adventurous as a real papa should be. Cedric. Now, afterwards, it is hard to understand how that small beast, Sniff, could ever have been persuaded to give Cedric away. Never before had Sniff done such a thing, rather the reverse. And furthermore Cedric really was quite wonderful. Cedric wasn't alive, he was a thing, but what a thing. At first sight he was just a small plush dog, rather bald and love-worn, but a closer look showed that his eyes were nearly topazes and that he had a small genuine moonstone on his collar just beside the clasp. And furthermore he carried an inimitable expression on his face, an expression that no other dog could ever have. Possibly the jewels were more important to Sniff than the expression, but in any case he loved Cedric. And as soon as he had given Cedric away he regretted it to desperation. He neither ate nor slept nor talked. He only regretted. But dearest Sniffy, Moominmama said worriedly, if you really did love Cedric so much, then why didn't you at least give him to someone you like and not to Gafsy's daughter? Pooh, Sniff mumbled, staring at the floor with his poor reddened eyes, it was Moomintroll's fault. He told me that if one gives something away that one ally likes, then one will get it back 10 times over and feel wonderful afterwards. He tricked me to it. Oh, Moomin Mama said. Well. She didn't find anything better to say. She felt she had to sleep on the matter. Evening fell, and Moomin Mama went to bed. Everybody said good night, and the lights were put out, one after the other. Only Sniff lay awake, staring up at the ceiling, where the shadow of a large branch was moving up and down in the moonlight. Through the open window he could hear Snufkin's mouth organ playing in the warm night down by the river. When Sniff's thoughts became too black he jumped out of bed and padded to the window. He climbed down the rope ladder and ran through the garden where the peonies gleamed white and all the shadows were coal black. The moon was high, far away and impersonal. Snufkin was sitting outside his tent. He didn't play any complete tunes tonight, only small shreds of music that resembled questions or those small concurring sounds one makes when one doesn't know what to say. Sniff sat down beside him and looked disconsolately into the river. Hello, Snufkin said. Good thing you came. I've been sitting here thinking about a story that might interest you. I'm not interested in fairy tales tonight, Sniff mumbled, wrinkling himself up. It's no fairy tale, Snufkin said. It's happened. It happened to an aunt of my mother's. And Snufkin started his story, sucking at his pipe and now and then splashing with his toes in the dark river water. Asterisk. Once upon a time there was a lady who loved all her belongings. She had no children to amuse or annoy her, she didn't need to work or cook, she didn't mind what people said about her and she wasn't the scared sort. Also she had lost her taste for play. In other words, she found life a bit boring. But she loved her beautiful things and she had collected them all her life, sorted them and polished them and made them more and more beautiful to look at. One really didn't believe one's eyes when one entered her house. She was a happy lady, Sniff nodded. What kinds of things did she have? Well, Snufkin said. She was as happy as she knew how to be. And now don't interrupt me, please. Then, one night it happened that this aunt of my mother's went down to her dark scullery to eat a cold cutlet, and she swallowed a large bone. She felt funny for several days afterwards, and when she didn't get any better she went to her doctor. He tapped her chest and listened to it and x-rayed her and shook her about, and at last he told her that this cutlet bone had stuck crosswise somewhere inside her. It was impossible to prise it loose. In other words, he feared the worst. You don't say, Sniff said, showing a little more interest in the story. He thought the lady was going to kick the bucket but he didn't dare tell her. That's about it, Snufkin agreed. But this aunt of my mother's wasn't easily scared, so she made him tell her how much time she had left, and then she went home to think. A few weeks wasn't very much. She suddenly remembered that in her youth she had wanted to explore the Amazonas, to learn deep sea diving, to build a large nice house for lonely children, to see a volcano and to arrange a gigantic party for all her friends. But all that was too late now, of course. Friends she had none at all, because she had only collected beautiful things, and that takes time. She grew more and more sad while she wandered around in her rooms. Her wonderful belongings gave her no comfort. On the contrary, they only made her think of the day when she'd go to heaven and leave them all behind her. And the thought of starting a new collection up there didn't make her at all happy, whatever the reason. Poor lady. Sniff cried. Couldn't she take the least little thing along with her? No, Snufkin said. It's not allowed. But now dry up, please, and listen. One night this aunt of my mother's lay awake looking up at the ceiling and brooding. All around her stood lots of beautiful furniture, and all over it were lots of beautiful knickknacks. Her things were everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, on the ceiling, in her cabinets, in her drawers, and suddenly she felt about to suffocate among all those belongings that gave her no comfort at all. And now an idea came to her. It was such a funny idea that this aunt of my mother's began to laugh where she lay. All at once she was feeling fit, and she rose and dressed and started to think. She had hit upon the idea to give away everything she owned. That would give her more breathing space, and it's something you need if you've a large bone stuck in your stomach and want to be able to think of the Amazonas. How silly, Sniff said disappointedly. It wasn't silly in the least, Snufkin objected. She had lots of fun while she sat thinking out what things to give away to whom. She had many relations and knew still more people, you see, that's quite possible even if you've no friends. Well, she thought of everyone, one after the other, and wondered what he or she would like best. It was like a game. And she wasn't stupid. To me she gave the mouth organ, perhaps you haven't known it's gold and rosewood? Well. She thought it out so wisely that everybody got exactly the thing that suited him and that he had dreamt of. This aunt of my mother's also had a turn for surprises. She sent all the things in parcels, and the receivers had no idea of who the sender was, they had never been in her home, because she had always been afraid they'd break things. It amused her to imagine their astonishment, their thoughts and guesses, and she was feeling quite superior. A little like those fairies that fulfill wishes in a jiffy as they fly along. But I didn't send Cedric in a parcel, Sniff cried with bulging eyes. And I'm not going to die either. Snufkin sighed. You're the same as ever, he said. But still, try to listen to a good story, can't you, even if it isn't about yourself. And think of me a bit, too. I've saved this story for you, and sometimes I like telling stories. Well, all right. At the same time something else was happening. This aunt of my mother suddenly found that she was able to sleep at nights, and in the daytime she dreamed of the Amazonas and read books on deep sea diving and drew plans for that house for children no one wanted. She had fun, and that made herself nicer than usual and people began to like her company. I must beware, she thought. Before I know a word I'll have a lot of friends and no time to arrange that enormous party I've dreamed about. Her rooms were becoming airier and airier. She sent off one parcel after the other, and the fewer possessions she had left, the lighter she felt. Finally, she was walking about in empty rooms, feeling rather like a balloon, a happy balloon ready to fly away. To heaven, Sniff observed drily. Now, listen. Don't interrupt me all the time, Snufkin said. I can hear you're too small for this story. But I'm going to finish it anyway. Good. By and by all her rooms were empty, and this aunt of my mother's had only her bed left. It was a large canopied bed, and when her new friends came to visit her it could hold them all, and the smallest one sat up in the canopy. Everybody had a wonderful time, and her only worry was about that great party which she didn't seem to find the time to have. They used to tell ghost stories and funny stories all the night, and then one evening. I know, Sniff said crossly. You're exactly like Moomin Troll. I know how it turned out. Then one evening she gave away her bed too and then she went off to heaven and was so happy, and the right thing for me to do is to give away not only Cedric but everything I have and then hand in my spade and bucket on top of it all. You're an ass, Snufkin said. Or, still worse, you're a spoil story. What I was about to relate was how this aunt of my mother's laughed so terribly at one of the funny stories, that the bone jumped out of her stomach and she became absolutely well. You don't say, Sniff cried, the poor lady. How do you mean, the poor lady, Snufkin asked. Don't you see? She had given all her things away, hadn't she, Sniff cried. Quite uselessly. Because she didn't die after all. Did she take all her things back then? Snufkin bit hard at his pipe and raised his eyebrows. You foolish little beast, he said. She made the whole thing into a funny story. And then she gave a party. And built the house for lonely children. She was too old for deep-sea diving, but she saw the volcano. And then she went off to the Amazonas. That was the last we heard about her. Such things cost money, Sniff said with practical disbelief. She had given everything away, hadn't she? Had she? Indeed. Snufkin replied. If you'd have listened as you should you'd remember that she kept the canopied bed, and this bed, my dear Sniff, was made of gold and simply crammed with diamonds and carnioles. As for Cedric, Gafsy made the topazes into eardrops for her daughter and gave Cedric black button eyes instead. One day Sniff found him lying forgotten in the rain and took him back home. The rain had washed away the moonstone which was never found again. But Sniff went on loving Cedric all the same, even if he now did it only for love's sake. And this does him some honor, I believe. Author's note.